Hey everybody, it's David Jenkins with Fonville Morrissey Realty. I'm a residential real estate agent here in the North Carolina Triangle. I want to talk for a minute about an overview of the buying process. So the first thing that a buyer might want to do is select a buyer's agent. And ideally you would pick me, but there's a lot of good agents out there. You'd want to pick someone who is honest and sincere, hardworking, quick to respond to communications by phone, text, or email. Someone who's a teacher at heart, can explain the process along the way, like we're doing right here. And then would also discuss dual agency and designated dual agency. And by the way, I have little videos below on all of those things. And the buyer would feel comfortable with the agent and the process and agency and so on. And then the buyer and the buyer's agent would discuss the buyer's goals and various options and strategy to achieve those goals. And then the buyer would talk, if applicable, if the buyer is not paying cash, the buyer would talk to a lender and become pre-approved for a loan and would have a general understanding how much monthly payments might be and down payment might be to buy a house that would fit the goals. And then the buyer and the buyer's agent would go out and start seeing properties. And we might be, I've shown this view as one property. This is the one I want to buy. And I've shown 100 properties to a buyer before. It's all fun for me, it's all good. And it's a learning process as we go through and see the properties because the buyer's search criteria is refined as we go and see more and more properties. And then once the buyer has a general idea of, I've seen so many bad ones and this one stands out. I know I'm making some compromises, but let's make a play for this one. Then the agent would put together a CMA, a comparative market analysis, to show the buyer what recently sold comparable properties went for, and then what would be maybe a fair price for this house, and maybe could we do better than fair, depending on the location and the time of year and so on, and the price point. Sometimes here in the Triangle, buyers are having to pay sometimes more than what seems fair to get the property if there are 10 offers or something. But other price points, other locations, other times of year, it might be that no other buyers made an offer. Maybe the property in question has been on the market a long time and can negotiate a low offer. Anyway, figuring all that out, the agent makes a recommendation regarding an offer, the buyer signs the offer, and then usually a seller will counter it, and the buyer counters the counter, and after a little back and forth, boom, time to celebrate, we're under contract. Well, that's just fantastic. Then at that point, if not before, the agent needs to give from that buyer a check, a due diligence check, and also an earnest money check, unless the earnest money will be paid as additional earnest money at the end of the due diligence period. That due diligence check is made out to the seller, and the earnest money check is made out to the escrow agent. On top of page 2 of the purchase contract, buyer and seller would agree on who that escrow agent was. And then we enter the due diligence period. So I just want to write up some new things about the due diligence period, and then we'll have this done. But I need just a moment to erase the board. Give me just a second. Okay, then during the due diligence period, the buyer might want to have some of these things done. None of these are required, but it's highly recommended the buyer have a home inspection done, oftentimes referred to as a building inspection, a termite inspection done, a radon inspection is a good idea, a mold inspection, very rare, but it's sometimes a good idea, a structural inspection if the building inspection warrants it, that would be done by an engineer. Mother-in-law inspection, I'm kidding here, but basically where I'm trying to get at is any kind of inspection the buyer wants to have done can be done. Inspect the air conditioning and heating. There are no rules. You can inspect anything you want by anybody. A survey is a good idea, marking the lot lines. And if you're getting a loan, a buyer's lender would send out an appraiser and the appraisal would be done. And then after all of these things are done during due diligence, then the buyer and seller would negotiate a due diligence agreement. The seller does not have to repair anything. The buyer doesn't have to buy the house. It's a second round of negotiation. And then if the contract called for it on page 1, that the buyer was going to bring in some additional earnest money, then at that point it would be brought in by certified check. And then the buyer would arrange to have utilities started as of the day of closing. You don't want to wait till the day of closing to make those calls. The utility companies need a day or two to pull all that together. And then and maybe even move 13 up a little bit, the buyer would shop for homeowners insurance. I have recommendations if you would like a great rate on homeowners insurance. And then if necessary, the buyer would re-inspect the property if during the due diligence period the buyer and seller had agreed that the seller was going to repair a lot of things and the buyer was concerned if the repairs were done correctly, the buyer can always re-inspect. And then the closing attorney would send over the closing disclosure with the final numbers on it, and I would go through that line by line with the buyer to make sure it was accurate and the buyer understood it. And then at the closing, the buyer would sign those documents, and then as soon as the attorney had recorded the deed, then the buyer would be entitled to get a key. And then the final thing, I ran out of space, but of course what the buyer would want to do after that is to recommend the hardworking buyer's agent to all your friends and family. So that's an overview of the process. If I could answer any questions about these or any other things related to the purchase or sale of residential real estate in the Triangle, please let me know. I'd be happy to help. Thank you.